They christened her with the most famous name in submarine history, and she lived up to it. For 25 years after she put to sea in 1955, she roamed the world's oceans, a triumph for American technology and a symbol of military strength. Today, she stands at ease, tied fast to a Groton, Connecticut dock, the center of a museum where 300,000 people visit each year to learn something of her story. She cruised much faster, deeper, and farther than ever before, a weapon system that gave us a radically new form of energy and revolutionized international military strategy. On June 14, 1952, the world was introduced to the beginning of an era. Her crew called her the first and finest, but the old girl's name is USS Nautilus.
At Groton, Connecticut, the huge submarine base sees a new era launched in underseas craft. A crowd of more than 10,000 is assembled for the keel laying of the first atomic-powered submarine. As the keel plate is lowered, President Truman approaches the huge cradle in which the sub will be assembled. Many of its parts have been under construction for a year. The President inscribes his initials on the plate with chalk, dedicating the Nautilus in one of the revolutionary chapters of the atomic age. The initials are then burned into the hull by one of the shipyard workers. Completion is expected within 1 or 2 years. Estimated speed underwater is 25 knots, with almost unlimited range on a few pounds of uranium, a deadly weapon for war or peace.
When you had command of the Nautilus, you felt you owned the oceans. You could go there, you could go fast, you could go deep, just as long as you wanted to. And that was something totally thrilling, totally new.
A Rickover assistant told me, if this thing works the way we think it will work, then it will change the face of the earth more in the next 50 years than it has changed in the last 2,000.
Submarines were always fascinating as a military platform because they could go underwater and hence the enemy couldn't see them, whether they were attacking ships or whether later on they were going to be attacking the shore with missiles, as we have today with strategic missiles. So that fascination with going underwater, which gave the submarine invisibility, stealth we would call it now, was very important from the very beginning of submarining.
Bearing mark, range mark, down scope.
The U.S. Navy bought its first submarine in 1900. The 54-foot-long USS Holland used a gasoline engine on the surface and electric batteries underwater. By the First World War, submarines were bigger and powered by diesel engines for surface cruising. It was the first time that subs were used as attack vessels on a large scale. The fleet boat of World War II was critical to the Allied war effort. American submarine crews were especially effective in the Pacific, sinking nearly 1,400 Japanese ships. But improved sonar and radar threatened submarine effectiveness. The need for oxygen by both cruise and combustion engines limited stealth. Submerged running was slow and for short distances. In 1939, naval scientists proposed nuclear fission as a means of unlimited underwater propulsion. But research was stopped by the Manhattan Project, which built the atomic bombs that ended the Second World War. When work was resumed after the war, a naval captain, Hyman Rickover, became convinced of the importance of atomic power. He would later become known as the father of the nuclear navy.
Rickover was a very intense, very intelligent, very abrasive individual. About 46, 47, Admiral Mills, who was head of the Bureau of Ships and in World War II had been Rickover's boss, had Rickover and about a dozen other officers and civilians from the Navy assigned to a nuclear power program. After the Navy, under Admiral Mills, tried several times to get the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, to support a nuclear submarine program, and they said, we're not ready for anything that specific. Mills was very astute, and he assigned Rickover as his liaison to the Atomic Energy Commission. To quote one naval officer, Mills knew the son of a bitch would get people to move. So two things happened. One, Rickover built an empire, and two, Rickover built the first nuclear submarines.
He's tough. He's a tough guy to live with. He's a tough guy to be interviewed by. He's a tough guy to report to. He's a tough guy to have to answer to.
He knew that in order to have a successful nuclear propulsion program that performance, reliability, safety were absolute must. He gained quite a bit of his reputation for abrasiveness due to insisting on quality.
We have to take all that tripe and find out what the government really owes. And after putting months on it, we find out it's only 29% accurate, and the company is happy to get 29 cents on a dollar. Mr. Chairman, you know, you asked me to tell you what I really thought, and I'm exposing you to that right now.
Admiral Rickover retired in 1986 after a 64-year career, the longest in U.S. Navy history. His longevity and his power stemmed from relationships forged in Congress and the White House. One early supporter was Senator Bryan McMahon of Connecticut, who sponsored the act that authorized the Nautilus program.
McMahon was particularly interested because the electric boat company in Groton, Connecticut, was essentially out of work. The U.S. Navy, after the war, was building very few ships and very few submarines.
Electric Boat started building submarines in 1924 at its Groton shipyard. At the peak of World War II, the yard employed 12,500 people and was launching a submarine every 2 weeks. But when the war ended, EB struggled to adapt.
The hull trades, which means the ship fitters, the chippers, the drillers, the welders and all, we were down, I think, to 52 people total in the shipyard.
We had built van bodies and sewing machines and bowling alleys and all kinds of things. So we were working, the guys in the machine shop were working on government work and commercial work and bowling alley work for all different pay rates. So we were at a real low in a machine shop, and then we heard rumors that we were going to start building a new type of submarine.
In August 1951, the Navy awarded Electric Boat the Nautilus contract. EB started hiring once again. In the 18 months it took to build Nautilus, the workforce grew from 700 to more than 15,000.
At the same time that we were doing the design, Rickover's people had set up for us to start building a prototype out in Idaho. And we did that. We Electric Boat, built that prototype in Idaho. And when we started recruiting people in the shipyard to go out there and build that plant, then people at EB started realizing this is for real. And then everybody wanted to get into the program.
There were no cost constraints, there were no time constraints. No one knew what to measure it against. Rickover laid out a schedule, and they came pretty close to the schedule.
We ended up writing for the first time. We wrote the specifications ourselves as we went along, and we drew all the contract plans ourselves as we went along, as compared to previously the Navy would give us specs and contract plans. And if there was something that wasn't going well, you didn't let that interfere with everything else. You went right ahead with whatever the plan was, and then you'd have to play catch-up.
For EB workers, Nautilus was a product of their hearts, minds, and hands, never to be forgotten. Almost every morning, a group of EB retirees share coffee and conversation at a Groton restaurant.
Thank you, Vine.
No, it was a trial and error and learn.
Yeah, it also introduced a lot of new trades.
Yeah.
Lead burners and laggers
everything.
and dosimeter readers. And
there was an awful lot of new things that had to be developed. Machinery, methods.
We learned a lot of new technologies, especially in the radiation fields and so forth, that we knew absolutely nothing about before we started.
Whoever thought of X-ray on a pipe?
Yeah.
Then you had to X-ray all the welds and everything else.
Ultrasonic techniques and things like that.
The thing that was outstanding to me was security. I mean, every way you look was security. And you got security lectures, it seems like, once a week. And it seemed like they were always changing your badge.
People just don't realize the amount of work and effort and material that go into building a submarine. And not only that, but the scheduling of it. I mean, it's so different than anything else. It's
Visualize
fantastic.
us 5 guys in this little space here, all working on a different job. We stand on each other's shoulders and step on each other and climb over each other. And we're hauling pipes and cables and all kinds of mechanical gear.
The submarine service had always attracted a special breed of man, marked by a high degree of interdependence and an ability to work in the cramped interiors of submarines. Nautilus was the first sub where crew comfort would not have to be sacrificed. It was a choice assignment, and Rickover was highly selective.
Rickover wanted intelligent people, people who could work all hours, all days, who had very few outside interests and commitments, people who were concentrators, people who would focus in on the subject at hand. And finally, Rickover, and this is, I think, a key factor in his infamous interviews, Rickover wanted people who would not argue his decisions, who would learn things his way.
The Nautilus, per se, had an amazing group of people put together, both officer and enlisted. And for a long time, I kept score on how many enlisted people that had been in Nautilus were commissioned. Everybody on there felt like they had an opportunity to be the Chief of Naval Operations.
The Nautilus crews underwent rigorous academic training. They learned the touchy business of handling a nuclear reactor by operating a full-size submarine prototype at the Atomic Energy Commission installation in Arco, Idaho.
There was two towns that the crew lived in while out there, Blackfoot, Idaho, and Idaho Falls. It was great. It really was. Idaho at that time was a center of all atomic research, and there were several reactors on the desert. That's where it was, out in the Great American Desert. And it was an atomic boom town, and there was just all kind of workers out there at these various sites generating nuclear power and learning about nuclear power.
Nautilus was christened by Mamie Eisenhower and launched into the Thames River in January 1954. It was a soul-stirring moment for the thousands who came to see her and the millions who heard or read about the launch on radio, in the papers, or in movie newsreels. From the day of her maiden voyage a year later, she shattered records, running deep, fast, and long on a uranium core that provided heat for steam to turn her propulsion turbine. With the addition of newly developed life support systems, she could stay submerged for weeks at a time. None of her exploits, however, would compare to the impact of Operation Sunshine, a top-secret attempt to cross the geographic North Pole. In 1957, Nautilus had made preliminary excursions under the polar ice, cruising to within 180 miles of the North Pole, closer than any ship had ever come. Her crew learned some valuable lessons.
We lost electrical power on the first one, lost the gyros, and really didn't know how to get about from under the ice. At the North Pole, everything is south. So when you're up there, if you lose electricity, get your gyros back on, and you go south, you may be going south toward the Soviet Union, you may be going south toward the Canadian archipelago. There's only a couple of little holes that are ocean, so you're hopefully going south toward the ocean. So we had all kinds of navigation systems, temperature, bottom navigation. People were measuring the water temperature to see if we're going toward warmer water. That means we must be going the right direction, you know.
We raised our periscope and bent the darn thing on what the captain referred to as an ice cube, but an ice cube weighs about 4 tons, being something the size of an armchair, he described it. And so we had to surface and repair the periscope, and that was a long, torturous affair of some 12 hours in freezing weather.
As a result of that trip, they modified tremendously the ship. They changed the top of the periscope housing system, which we call a sail, made that all out of steel, put a roll bar on the top of the thing so that the thing could be used as a weapon against the underside of the ice to actually break through if you had to.
For the polar trip, we installed the guts out of a Navajo missile, which turned out to be the first ship's inertial navigation.
In 1957, America's space program was slow to get off the ground, while Russia had successfully launched Sputnik. In response, President Eisenhower ordered Nautilus on a record-setting mission.
When we left Seattle, Washington that day, and the captain announced on the announcing system that we were on a top-secret mission to out-Sputnik the Russians by going from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the North Pole, there was a buzz of activity, and here we were going to do something, again, you know, totally unheard of.
We got in between the islands, the shallow land between Russia and Alaska, and we found that ice was just too heavy there. We almost got stuck in it. So At one time, the bottom came up within 50 feet of the keel.
The captain made the decision that the ice was not quite ready for us, even though we were ready for it. And we reversed course and took a safe track back out of the ice field and headed south and went to Pearl Harbor for a month.
The crew kept its polar mission secret for the entire month. Systems were again modified and polar ice conditions monitored by plane. Nautilus left Pearl Harbor for another attempt at a polar crossing.
The trip that went all the way through and that was finally successful, the one that got so much attention, really was about the easiest trip that we had made up there. We had learned a lot on our first attempts. And in fact, this was our third try at getting through there. And everything worked beautifully.
And we kind of just slipped right through. And then once we reached deep water, of course, you don't have to worry about the depth of the ice anymore. We just went down deep and ran. And from that point on, it became a rather routine submerged transit.
The way to explore the Arctic is in shirt sleeves with a cup of coffee, and that was the condition in Nautilus and most parts of the ship.
Just prior to reaching the pole, the captains talked on the 1MC, or our public address system, if you will. We had a countdown to note this event, and we not only got to the North Pole, we literally pierced it. That's the way they described it, because the navigation was that good. And then after that, we had a cake cutting ceremony, and one of the fellows was re-enlisted in the Navy. So it was a day full of partying and fun.
I'm a little neutron, round and fat, spinning around the old top hat, looking for a nucleus to split in two, just to make some steam for you.
Nautilus and her crew had traveled more than 96 hours and 1,800 miles submerged under the polar ice. Her startling feat was announced by President Eisenhower. Returning from England, she cruised submerged 3,100 miles to New York City in just over 6 days, setting another record. World attention was again focused on Nautilus and the marvel of her nuclear power.
That was one of the key functions of the Nautilus when I was on it, was the selling of nuclear power. In addition to your normal watch duties, you frequently had tour guide duty when you got through being a watchstander. And we all got into the ball game because it was going to build our Navy and make it a nuclear Navy. And you did this both in port and underway. In the 2 years I was, 25 months I was on the vessel, it was only 2 days in that whole time that we didn't go to sea without visitors.
We used to call it the four-star playhouse. Everybody that had 4 stars got to ride, and we carried, I don't know, thousands of visitors. We said USS stood for Underway Saturdays and Sundays because that's generally when we took the tours. We'd go out and do as Captain Wilkinson would say, angles and dangles.
It was a successful sales pitch. When Nautilus provided power for the keel laying of the nuclear submarine Lafayette, it was a symbol of the country's commitment to a nuclear navy. Today's Navy maintains 100 nuclear-powered attack submarines and 36 ballistic missile subs. The stealth, speed, and range of these ships have made them a formidable part of the nation's nuclear deterrence.
Whereas the Nautilus carried about 20 torpedoes and had 6 torpedo tubes, the modern ballistic missile submarine still has torpedo tubes and carries a few torpedoes, but has 24 missiles. These weapons can go 4,000 miles or more, and as they're in flight, the warhead breaks apart and they drop small reentry vehicles or small nuclear weapons on up to 14 different targets in an area.
There's no question that without the submarine fleet, this would have been a much more dangerous world. The fact that from the first day of the Nautilus's leaving Groton, there was now a force that was undetectable, that could stay submerged for extensive periods of time, radically altered defense and offensive military strategy. A surprise attack that might wipe out your adversary's land and even air resources would still leave the submarine fleet.
About 175 nuclear submarines have been launched by the U.S. Navy since Nautilus slid down the ways. Driven by the Cold War, submarines became larger, more sophisticated, with deadlier nuclear weapon payloads. As the nuclear program has grown, so has the level of controversy. Retired Navy officer Bill Yates, who helped develop the Trident submarine, is now a member of a nuclear freeze group.
So in 1983, this is 10 years after I'd retired, when I was invited to the commissioning of the brand new Trident submarine in Florida, I was delighted to get a chance to visit one of these ships. But I was struck during the commissioning ceremony when the speaker said, you know, we can sleep better tonight because the USS Florida is in commission. Thought struck me, that's nonsense. The reality hit me like a bolt out of the blue. If that ship had sunk right alongside the pier right then, provided you get the crew off safely, it wouldn't have made a nickel's worth of difference to our security. We already had 41 Polaris submarines in commission. At any moment, any day or night, there were at least 12 of them on patrol, on alert, ready to launch their missile. Could anybody really believe that adding 24 new missile tubes to our arsenal is going to deter the Soviets any more than they were already deterred?
Anti-nuclear demonstrators have become a familiar sight outside Electric Boat, the Groton Naval Base, and the Nautilus Museum. Art Laffin has been active in the anti-nuclear movement since 1977.
Trident is the end of the world. Choose non-violence or non-existence.
Well, the Nautilus is part of the beginning of this terrible chapter in human history where the nuclear age began. And it's never been the same since. When we've hammered on the Trident submarine, we've attempted to enact the biblical prophecy to hammer swords into plowshares. And so we believe these acts are real acts of disarmament.
The Cold War arms race has been good to Connecticut, where more than 1 out of every 5 jobs is dependent on defense. But a lessening of superpower tensions while raising hopes for disarmament also brings fears of a shrinking defense budget and a smaller submarine force.
It's clear with the changes in the Soviet Union and the pressure on the budget that there will be drastic reductions in defense spending within the next 5 years. The submarine program, while the safest, will also see a reduction in coming years. And the important thing for the economy is to be ready for that change.
It's clear that New London County, as the most defense-dependent county in the nation, where more than $7,000 comes in Pentagon contracting per man, woman, and child, that we have clearly put too many eggs in one basket, economically speaking.
The submarine force has provided about 50% of the strategic warheads available in our arsenal for these last several years for less than 25% of the money that we spend on strategic defense. So our view is that submarines not only are sustainable over a long period of time and invisible to the enemy and impossible to detect, but also the very best bargain that we have, especially in a strategic sense.
Recently, the safety record of the Navy nuclear program has also come under fire. A recent study by the environmental group Greenpeace claims that accidents at sea have been far more numerous than previously reported. The report documents more than 200 mishaps involving U.S. ships alone. According to Greenpeace, the nearly 550 nuclear reactors and 15,000 nuclear warheads at sea on Russian and American ships pose a great risk to the environment.
I mean, the militaries have lost 50 warheads and 9 reactors as a result of their accidents and their negligence. You know, what do you do about it? And there would be a lot more had the Soviets not been able to recover a couple of their submarines that had sunk, and had we not been able to recover some of ours as well. Then one has a real hard time in putting across to the public that this is safe because you've got these nuclear materials sitting on the ocean floor, and nuclear materials are dangerous in any quantity, any place.
America expects, in fact, America demands that we have an impeccable safety record in those 2 extremely sensitive areas. We do. Greenpeace has been very clever in arranging facts and putting them in an order that leads you to a conclusion that in fact is not supported.
The Navy has built about 150 nuclear submarines and over a dozen nuclear surface ships. The number of problems they've had from a nuclear viewpoint, not a mechanical, not a engineering, but a nuclear viewpoint, have been minimal. We did lose 2 nuclear submarines. Neither one of those losses resulted in any radiation being released above background levels. By anyone's standards, we have a very, very safe nuclear Navy, and that, again, is a key part of the Rickover legacy.
Nautilus was the first use of nuclear energy for anything but the bomb. Once she proved successful, Rickover and the Atomic Energy Commission began a program that resulted in the construction of the first civilian nuclear electric plant. That reactor went online in 1957. It was a time of great anticipation, the start of commercial nuclear energy.
In the 40s, in the 50s, the public was very pro-atomic power. One, the 2 atomic bombs had ended World War II. Secondly, was the feeling that atomic power, and this is a key part of the Nautilus story, in my opinion, because Nautilus proved power was possible, not just weapons, but power was possible. Atomic power could provide cheap energy, could lead to almost a new industrial revolution in the United States, could end poverty, could raise everybody's standard of living.
Today, there are about 415 civilian reactors worldwide, with another 100 under construction. This country's 111 nuclear plants provide 18% of our electric power, substantially less than early predictions. High costs, shutdowns, and problems with radioactive waste, along with 3 Mile Island in Chernobyl, have all contributed to a loss of public confidence. All plants ordered since 1973 have been canceled. No new plants have been ordered since 1978. According to a recent poll, 61% of the American public opposes any new plants. The problem, say industry spokesmen, is primarily political.
We didn't do a very good job of educating the public. In the days of the Manhattan Project, it was all secret, and then when it was released, there was still a lot of secrecy about the nuclear program. So a lot of people didn't know a lot about nuclear power and still don't know a lot about nuclear power. Just have to do a good job of educating the oncoming generations. It's going to take a couple of generations, I think. Unfortunately, there are a number of people who are very vocal against nuclear power.
The irony of the Nautilus, where it perhaps had its greatest failure, was that it really did fail to put into place a civil nuclear industry that survived and flourished and prospered in the same way in which the military's nuclear power industry did. It just didn't. And, I think one could examine the technology, one could examine the safety record, one could examine the cost, searching for the managerial explanation. But I think the explanation is more than just managerial. I think it has to do with society and the fact that society doesn't want these instruments that they really don't understand and are quite fearful of around them.
Nautilus was decommissioned in 1980 after 25 years of service. After undergoing extensive conversion in California, she was towed home to Groton in 1985 to become the centerpiece of a new $8 million museum. Nautilus was given a hero's welcome, not for just the shattering of maritime records, but for her broader legacy, the beginning of an era that changed the world in fundamental ways.